You're a socialist, aren't you? And she said, no, I'm a Marxist. But she was teaching American government to freshmen at UC Berkeley, to a huge class. But of course, she didn't mention that we were getting American, poli-sci from the perspective of a Marxist. I could tell by the things that she was saying that that's what she was. But the rest of the freshman class, they don't know. They just listen there. They figure that this is it. So I don't think they're evil, but we just need to stop them. We need to change the players in Washington. We need to get rid of these career politicians that have brought this country to the brink of economic ruin before they actually finish the job. Anyway, hopefully the people in this room could be instrumental in helping me, to educate the voters in the state of Connecticut to understand these issues and understand who I am and why I'm running, and why the only vote that counts will be a vote for me. Anyway, let me open it up and take questions. I'm sure that there are plenty of questions in the room. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Joe Beskowski. I'm the second year at the School of Management here. I saw you on CNBC a month ago, and I went out and bought your book, and I think it's a great book, and so if anyone hasn't read it yet, I definitely recommend it. So you mentioned that some of the things that you're trying to do politically are very difficult to do because politicians, like you said, like to kick the can down the road. So over the past decade, I think there's been a lot of pressure to hold company executives accountable for the decisions that they make and the effect it has on their employees, shareholders, and stakeholders. Perhaps, is there something we can do with our political system to hold our politicians more responsible for decisions they're making today?
Well, unfortunately, you can't sue them. They exempt themselves for lawsuits for the things that they've done. So the only redress that we have is to vote them out of office. And of course, they have the deck stacked. It's difficult to unseat an incumbent. We've succeeded with Chris Dodd because he was just so unpopular that he just couldn't win. But it took, over 30 years in the Senate for that to happen. But, we need to make sure that his protege isn't just, anointed to replace him in Dick Blumenthal. Because the last thing this country needs is another lawyer in Washington. I mean, he's done enough damage in Hartford. Look at how he's helped screw up the state of Connecticut. We can't send him to Washington. And so that's it. I mean, I guess voting him out is all we can do. As far as the private sector, yeah, I wish that the government would stay out of the private sector and let shareholders, hold their representatives accountable. File lawsuits against some of these CEOs and executives. Try to recoup some of the bonuses that were paid under false pretense. I think there are a lot of lawsuits that could be filed by shareholders against some of these companies, but let's let it be done in the court system and in private. And it's not up to the government what executives are paid. Now, of course, if the government is bailing these companies out, now we've muddied the water. In the case of like all the companies that got bailout money, well, should the government have a say in how the companies spend that money? Now you have a question of did two wrongs make a right? Maybe in this case they do. But I think the correct thing to have done is to let them fail. Then it's not even an issue. How are they going to pay bonuses when they're in bankruptcy? So that's what we should have done. But once you poison the well, I mean, you open yourself up to all these other problems, and you're down this slippery slope. Yeah.
I guess just more of a basic question. Other than defense or other key country functions, are there any other sectors that you see the government has a positive influence in?
Yeah, look, I think governments can do good in society. The problem is they generally expand to the point where they do more harm than good. I mean, government is, I think it was Jefferson or Thomas Paine, or the government is a necessary evil. We do need government, but we have to understand that it is inherently evil, and we have to find ways to keep it restrained. Our founding fathers thought they did that with the Constitution. That's why they wrote it. It was to restrain the power of the federal government, to limit its powers to a few clearly defined and enumerated things that they can do. Unfortunately, the government has, escaped those chains because the courts have abdicated their responsibility. They no longer enforce the Constitution. The government thinks the Constitution doesn't apply to them. They do whatever they want. And nothing is, hardly ever gets struck down as unconstitutional. Certainly, the things the government does. So, what was your question?
Well, whether there were any particular sectors in that you saw.
Yeah, okay, now I remember. But, yeah, look, I think that from a federal perspective, the most important thing for the federal government is national defense, national security, securing our borders, securing our embassies around the world, making sure that Americans are safe when they're here in America, when they travel abroad. Maybe they have some other functions with air traffic or different things that maybe would be difficult for an individual state to do, but it seems like it's more effective if the federal government is involved. But all these things are clearly enumerated in the Constitution. But most of the things that the federal government does either should not be done at all or should be done by states or local governments. And a lot of times when I talk about, I want to shut down all this government, people always say, well, what about the roads? What about the schools? Well, but that has nothing to do with the federal government. All the things that we value from government are the things that we're getting locally. We don't value what we're getting from the federal government, so let's get rid of it all. And we always want government to be at its most local point. We don't want to have Washington making decisions for 50 different states and thousands of different cities. Why? We want decisions to be made at the point most local to where those decisions are having an impact. We don't want to centralize them in this gigantic agency in Washington, D.C. That is the problem. We have a federalist system of government. We're supposed to have 50 sovereign states that have come together for a union so we can have mutual defense and we don't have tariffs, so but we have surrendered that whole concept, the whole idea, the whole 10th Amendment of the Constitution. Again, is no longer enforced. But I want to get rid of most of what the federal government does. And if we do that, then we can lower taxes. I had a question from somebody in the audience a couple days ago. I was speaking at a town council meeting. It was yesterday. And I said, I want to fire a lot of government workers. And she said, well, but there's so many people who are unemployed. How can we fire workers and make even more people? And I said, no, but they're going to get jobs in the private sector if we do the right thing to free it up. People made that argument. I was listening, people made that argument about the Second World War. That, we had 10 million men under arms. And there were a lot of people who were afraid that if we fired all those soldiers, that we'd have an unemployment problem. There were people arguing to keep them employed. They were worried, hey, we have all these factories that are making bombs. We better keep making the bombs so we don't have to fire the factory workers, even though we didn't need the bombs. But the truth is, we fired all those people, and there was a boom. There was no unemployment. They got jobs in the civilian sector. Those jobs created. The economy absorbed them. That's what would happen. If the government removes all the barriers that prevent jobs from being created, they're going to be there. Wages will adjust. Jobs will be created. The economy will function if the government gets out of the way. As long as the government's in the way, it's never going to function. Any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned Marxist socialism, and the Austrians have been instrumental in refuting just about every facet of socialism. But when Marxists run into the brick wall of economic calculation presented by Ludwig von Mises, they try to shirk the brick wall and try to find like a morality issue for the need for socialism. What is your...
I think capitalism is the most moral, economic system available. It's the only system that recognizes an individual's rights to his own labor, to the fruits of his own labor, to own what he produces. Other systems assume that the state is sovereign, that it has the ability to take from one person and give to somebody else, and they call it charity. But charity is what you do with your own money. If you take somebody's money from one person and give it to somebody else, you're not being charitable. You're being a thief. And I believe that people are good, are charitable, and that to the extent that people do fall through the cracks in a capitalist system, they will be helped. But I think in a capitalist system, far few people will fall through those cracks, because the cracks will be a lot smaller. The government, in their social welfare state, they create this culture of dependency. There are a lot more people who need help precisely because we're not allowing capitalism to work. But I think what happens is, a lot of people just don't connect the dots. They don't see, the unintended consequences. They say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, that quote came into existence for a reason. And I think a lot of people, take the easy way out. I mean, socialism on the surface is appealing if you don't think it out. And I think that you can you can feel good about yourself if you sign on to these doctrines. And that's why a lot of the socialists, or the liberals, where they are,